Well, the election is over, and we know the results. So what's next for public discourse, election trust, and political polarization?
You're going through all the struggle with never getting to the satisfaction. And nobody really wants that. It's like constant exercise, but you're never strengthening your muscles.
On this episode, we continue our special Election Day coverage with part 2 of a mini-roundtable discussion with Sutherland executives who weigh in on what the conclusion of this election cycle means for the state and nation moving forward. You're listening to Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and we're continuing our discussion post-election, evaluating what happened, what are some key takeaways for us at the state level and at the national level about what happened on Election Day and what that means moving forward. To have this conversation, I'm pleased to welcome into our studio our Chief Growth Officer at Sutherland, Derek Monson. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
And also Stan Rasmussen, who's our Vice President of Legislative Affairs. Stan?
Great to be here, Nick. Thanks.
Thanks to both of you guys for being here. This is kind of a part 2 in a way of sort of just a reflection on the culmination of election season. Of course, with the completion of the election, what we know the outcome for the most part, and we really just want to talk about what this means moving forward. And we had Rick and Peter on in our last episode to kind of do a reflection on the entire campaign season and what it meant for a number of different things. First, I want to start off by asking you both, what are just some of kind of your initial reactions? What takeaways do you kind of take from this election season being over? And we can look at it through a couple lenses. There's a lens of election trust and kind of voting and election policy. There's the lens of public discourse and the health or lack thereof. Of course, there's polarization, and then also kind of what does this mean for our constitutional system moving forward, whether it be separation of powers or federalism. So throwing a lot of lenses at you to think through, but what's kind of your initial, what's the top line reaction or takeaway from each of you from this election and what it means for the state and country moving forward?
I'll jump in. Relief. That's kind of, I think, the top line response from a lot of people. Both relief that, all the campaign ads, the phone blowing up with texts of campaign, all that's over. But from a more serious note, relief that even with a contentious election, we didn't have a repeat of 2020 where the loser denies the results of whatever state or whatever race, particularly at the national level, the presidential level. And then I think another takeaway is, well, why didn't that happen? Maybe people would say, well, because Kamala was never going to deny the results, right? And there's an argument for that. But certainly in politics, when someone introduces something as a political tactic, the other side usually adopts it. And certainly there have been folks on that side of the partisan aisle that have denied elections in the past. So, and then like the recent past even, with Stacey Abrams in Georgia. So, but part of the reason I think that didn't happen is because the campaign was more substantive this time around. While President-elect Trump, I guess it's both, focused so much in the last handful of years on the 2020 outcome and how he didn't win, that was stolen from him and it was the wrong outcome. When the campaign hit, particularly in the last number of months, they dropped that way of arguing, and compared to 2016, where they focused a lot on don't vote early, don't vote by mail. Instead, they actually embraced a variety means of voting that in the past they were calling fraudulent in states like Pennsylvania and other swing states where they won this time and won comfortably compared to 2020. So I think there are a variety of themes here or points maybe that can be tied up into the theme of substance is the best politics, right? If you can elevate the vision, the policy ideas of your candidate over things like debating over how people vote and the rules of elections, you're more likely to resonate with people and win an election. And as it turns out, that set of politics actually is also better for our society because it avoids some of these outcomes where you feel and you give people reason to be concerned about how the election came out because you didn't harp on a particular means of voting as a form of fraud. And so when the results come out that a lot of people use that form of voting, then it can be accepted. And you're not giving them reason to not accept it. Of course, there's the hypothetical, what happens if Trump would have lost? Would he have basically done a rerun of 2020? And that's very possible, right? There were indications that might have happened. But rather than dealing with hypotheticals, I think we deal with the reality of what did happen. And so whether it's in how we campaign or just how we communicate with each other, focusing on principles, values, the Constitution, substance. I mean, maybe one more example, if I can point it out. In Vice President Harris's concession speech, it was a very inspiring speech from those who didn't vote for her, who don't agree with her. At one point, for instance, where she was talking about accepting election results, she said, "In our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States, and loyalty to our conscience and to our God." Now, this is a candidate who earlier in the campaign, when someone made a religious statement at one of her rallies, she said, "You're at the wrong place. You might want to go down the street to the Trump campaign rally." Who is then in this concession speech talking about her conscience and our God. And if you listen to that speech, the concession speech, it was very genuine. And it makes sense that it's more genuine because all the pressure's off, right? You don't have to think through, okay, how are people going to receive this? And is that going to win me votes or lose me votes? She was just probably being herself. And to me, the point is, if I was a campaign advisor, I think, kind of looking back, I would let a campaign go for a month or so and then say, okay, now that your emotions are invested, now that you're doing stuff, write your concession speech and use that to guide how you speak, what the policy proposals you think of, and how you campaign. Because when you're genuine, when you offer the substance of who you are, even if it kind of pushes against the grain of your partisan politics, again, for instance, Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party acknowledging God, as being a source of who you should be loyal to, not stereotypical, right? And if you do that kind of thing, you're going to resonate more broadly with people, and you're actually going to benefit our constitutional system by encouraging people's devotion to the Constitution and confidence in voting, because you're not focusing on things that undermine their confidence in voting.
There's two things standing out, and Stan, I want to get your general reaction as well, and maybe see if this filters into sort of policymaking moving forward, especially with your role focused on the legislature here in Utah and the interaction that Sutherland has with state-based policymaking through that. But there's really kind of, I guess, two broad lenses I want to tease out from what you just said, Derek, and it seems like there's this concept of unifying moments and unifying messages. And if I'm kind of interpreting what you're saying accurately, that campaigns are in and of themselves are not really unifying moments. That sort of the point is to beat the other side, right? So you want to get your team riled up into the polls and persuade others to join your team to the extent that you can. So by definition, a campaign is not a unifying moment necessarily, though maybe to your point it could be actually. And maybe there are some examples in the past where campaigns have been. But then the other aspect of unifying messages, where it sounds like you're kind of talking about kitchen table issues that, we've seen here in Utah, for example, from Sutherland polling data and other polling data, that the cost of housing is a top, if not the number one priority for Utah voters. Housing is expensive in Utah, and folks are sensitive to that. On the national level, post-election, there's been a lot of commentary about inflation and the health of the economy overall, the cost of goods, playing a big role in how people were feeling about the trajectory of the country. And so is it right to say that to the extent that candidates and elected officials, for that matter, can focus on the unifying issues, which tend to be those kitchen table issues, not exclusively perhaps, but maybe predominantly, and then also look at what are the unifying moments? And I guess the thing to tease out from that is right after an election concludes, maybe folks are kind of naturally predisposed to viewing that as a unifying moment. And to your example of concession speeches striking a very different tone than campaign speeches, which I think is noteworthy. And then also the last analogy I wanted to bring in was President Biden, during his inauguration speech after he was elected, I remember his inauguration speech was very unifying. It was very much like we need to come together as a country. We need to have unity. But then the way the administration governed, there were a lot of voters, obviously a lot since that administration's extension through the vice president was not successful, that didn't feel like the administration lived up to that unifying moment and that unifying message in the inaugural speech. So again, I throw all that out there to see how can we pick apart what are takeaways. Is it right to think of it in terms of we need to when we talk about politics, voters, candidates, everyone included, focus more on the unifying messages and focus on what can be those unifying moments, and to your point, being genuine, being sincere, even amidst disagreement. Again, throwing a lot, but Stan, any reaction, or Derek, anything you'd add to that?
Sure. I want to underscore what Derek said about relief. I think there's a relief that the saturation bombing of the media, the texts, the emails, the billboards, the TV, the radio, that's over, and that's great. And I think part of the relief is, especially as we hear concession speeches and go back from talking at mode to talking with mode, which is much more engaging and potentially reinforcing of unifying. As we do that, I think there's a reminder that we have to live together. That this is a diverse culture. We have a lot of different viewpoints, and we have to find a way to get along. And I think the combat of politicking is exhausting. And I think there's a desire to move on.
There's an analogy that comes to mind that I originally heard this from Arthur Brooks in one of his books, but this idea that when football players, when they're on the field in the middle of the game, they're fighting as hard as they can to win, right? You hit the other side as hard as you can, you run as fast as you can, you deploy every strategy you can think of within the rules, obviously, when you're on the field, because your sole goal is to beat the other side. But then when the whistle blows and the game is over, generally in sports, both teams line up and they shake hands and they say good game to each other. And sometimes you see people giving each other hugs, even though they just spent the last couple hours beating the crap out of each other on the field. And it's one of the things that I'm hopeful can sort of return and be more a part of politics. And maybe these gracious concession speeches are an example of that. That after, in the last episode, we used the term blood sport to refer to politics. Peter mentioned that's kind of what it is or what it has become. But how do we shift back to, even if campaigns can get kind of tense, which I don't know if there's a way to avoid that, but how do we shift back to the sense of when the whistle blows, we're all Americans and we have to live together?
Well, I think the football analogy is actually a good one, both in highlighting what needs to happen as well as the challenge of making it happen. So in looking at fans of two different football teams, they are both having a similar experience in watching their team, right? Their passions or emotions are going up and down, but they would both look at each other, fans of the two different teams, right? And this is right on the eve of the BYU-Utah rivalry. So let's think about that, right? And you would look at that team that fan on the other side and say, well, I get you're into and supporting football, right? I disagree with your team. I maybe hate your team, but I get you are supporting the same thing I'm supporting, which is a football game. In politics, we've abandoned that kind of common sense understanding of what we're doing to we're not now, for instance, the analogy might be, okay, I get you support the candidate that I oppose, but you're still in favor of supporting our country and our Constitution, right, and promoting those things like the football game, right? That's the equivalent of the football game. But we've gotten to a point in politics where we deny that that's even true, that the fact you support that candidate means you are opposed to our country, opposed to the fundamental ideals of our country, opposed to maybe our Constitution. You want whatever. You want fascism, you want socialism, you want something else, right, other than the country. So I think that points to what we need to do is to recognize, and again, you see it in, for instance, the concession speech of Vice President Harris. It was very patriotic. It was very calling to some of the fundamental beliefs of our nation about rights and liberties, and what America is about. Pursuing these ideals and following the norms that allow a democratic or a representative government system to function. But the tough thing is, it's obvious that everybody's supporting a football game when they're cheering for their team, because it's right in front of your face. If anybody said, oh, you don't really even support football, it would be ridiculous. You can actually get away with that in politics, right? You can like credibly, and someone to the person who's hearing, credibly say, no, this person is not in favor of America. And you even get rewarded for that, right? There's whole industries in the campaign world that know how to raise money and get votes by telling people that's what the other side thinks. So what needs to happen, and this is, again, the challenge, when you don't have that football game that's clearly about football in front of you, you have politics, which people create meanings around that make it not about our country and not about our Constitution. You just need to deny those things. You need to, if you're going to deny something, deny those lies. That people running for office, as a general rule, because they're a member of a party or something like that, they believe things differently than you, are somehow opposed to our country, opposed to our Constitution, because our Constitution is a broad thing. The history of our nation encapsulates viewpoints and principles from across the ideological spectrum. There is no monopoly of one ideology on our country, as much as people don't want to believe that. Now, it doesn't mean you have to therefore agree with everything that people are saying, but you can acknowledge the legitimacy that is coming out of something in our founding period or in our Constitution or Declaration of Independence, and acknowledge that there's probably space for that somewhere. They're still supporting a football game. They're still supporting our country. Don't deny the obvious political facts. And if we can do that kind of thing, then all of a sudden those industries I was telling you about will actually go away, and our politics will change. Because if they can't raise money, if they can't sway your vote by making those arguments, they're going to turn to other things. So ultimately, you might say, and this is generally true in American government, in a representative system where it's self-government. We vote for the people that lead us. That the problems are a reflection of what we allow as a society, as people, the ultimate source of sovereign power in the United States. And if we don't allow those things by how we vote, by how we engage in campaigns, they will go away, they will change. And if we do, if we are responsive to those things, if we kind of give in to this side of us that thinks, because you think differently than me, you must really be either something's wrong with your intelligence or your morals. If we can kind of set aside those more baser thoughts, that people want us to believe in politics often, then those things will change and we'll have a more unifying experience, even if it's a passionate disagreement in a campaign, because we still see the other person as part of something that we believe in.
When we recognize and acknowledge that there are fundamentals that we all have concord on, that we all agree on, we can have that variety of perspective and preference and approach and modes of resolving problems. I see this on the Hill here in Utah, not just as relationships between Democrats and Republicans, but also within the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus of the two bodies. Individuals who are capable of recognizing we have many things in common. Yes, we disagree on these. Let's work those through and take more of a constructive, let's talk about it approach, as opposed to a more doctrinaire, pound the table, I'm right, you're wrong approach. The ones who are more engaging in the conversational approach are more effective. And those who are less so apparently see some payoff with whoever it is they think they need to line up with, but they are less effective in the dialogue and the decision-making processes of policy in the state.
Let me weave those two things together, because, Derek, as you were talking, I started to formulate this question, and then Stan, I think you kind of started to answer it. But what do we do when there are such fundamental disagreements? And you talked about the rhetoric that, the other team by default, because they're the other team, hates America, hates the Constitution, they hate you, that kind of stuff. I wholly agree with the point that that's unhelpful, unhealthy, inaccurate rhetoric for the country.
And it's generally inaccurate.
Right. It doesn't line up with I think the way most Americans actually feel about these issues. But I want to pinpoint the question of, in the instance where somebody does have genuine concerns about a particular candidate or maybe a particular party with respect to things that are more foundational, like the Constitution. So just use this recent election as an example. If a more right-leaning voter genuinely looked at a potential Harris administration and looked at the record of the Biden administration and thought, I actually have real concerns about their fidelity to the Constitution, or their understanding of the Constitution in the way that I feel demonstrates respect to that document. In the same way that somebody that's a left-leaning voter might look at a Trump administration and say, well, I have real concerns about that administration demonstrating fidelity to the Constitution. In both instances, if they're looking at past trajectories, those can obviously be some pretty fundamental disagreements. How do we broach those disagreements in a way that is clear-eyed about concerns and risks and what people genuinely fear could happen, but do it in such a way that what you're saying, Stan, is this healthier version of discourse that I would say it stops short of saying, well, therefore they are bad, evil, and hate America. There seemed to be a little bit more understanding that needs to happen. So how do we have that discussion across those lines of fundamental disagreement where people don't feel like they have to back down per se from their principles or their genuine, well-founded concerns, but can actually have a constructive debate rather than just the kind of awful politicized rhetoric that often happens in campaigns?
I think a big part of that comes down to our understanding and education in the principles of our society. So again, just going back to Vice President Harris's speech, she made this comment that every one of us, no matter who we are or where we started out, has certain fundamental rights and freedoms that must be respected and upheld. And she said that from the standpoint of, this is the fight that I undertook in this campaign that I'm going to continue to fight for. That phrase, that understanding, that I guess description of what she was doing, I think would be embraced by most Republicans and conservatives, what they're trying to do, right? Certain fundamental rights and freedoms that need to be respected and upheld. So, and when you look back in the history of our country, right, ever since the Declaration and the Constitution were put in place, obviously different time frames, right, years apart, we've been debating over what they mean. That is the norm in America, in the United States. That's not a sign that one person believes in the Constitution or not. That's a sign that actually we all believe in the same thing, so much so that we're going to argue about what they mean. But we never get to that point, right? We always think, well, if you believe that, you don't even believe what I believe in, or you don't even think that equality is what it really is, or freedom is what it really is. Find the words from the Declaration or Constitution that you kind of find issue with how people define them. But again, that is actually the hallmark of what it means to be an American, is you care about those words, you care about those ideas, so much so you're going to passionately engage and debate on what they do mean and how far they go and what their limitations are. And so I think it's just recognizing that point, that we're actually debating the same things. We have disagreements about what they are, what they mean, how far they go. But you can recognize the commonality in that you believe in these same concepts, even if you see them a little differently than I do. And again, just what we have in our country now is, I think, a fundamental inability to recognize through the lens of our history that that's been the hallmark of American politics, and therefore you can have a shared kind of origin story, right, of how we come to our disagreements. And so that doesn't mean you have to give up the disagreements. It just means that the disagreement itself, in some ways, is the shared commonality, right, that we go back to these source documents and ideas and care about what they mean, and what one person's going to win one time, the other person's going to win down the road. That's the other thing I think we can have kind of a shared thing on, is that people want us to believe that every election nowadays is everything's on the table. It's so high stakes, and that is just fundamentally untrue. Our country has gone through everything we've gone through now at different times in our history. And it is important, it is significant, it is impactful. But I think the only reason it could be so high stakes is if our reaction to it goes off the rails. When we lose, we go crazy as a people or as a leader or as a campaign, as opposed to following the norms of, hey, we lost this time, we're going to get them next time, because that's actually going to be true. The pendulum's going to swing back and forth. Again, the Trump history is a perfect example of that, right? He wins, he loses, he wins again. That is the norm of politics in a span of about 8 years now.
The inclination and willingness to attend to and focus on what we have in common, I think, is an acquired taste and a developed skill, and it requires patience, both for those who are on both sides of the discussion, the issue. And I think that which we have in common is principle. And if we regard principle as that which never changes, it's immutable, it's truth. And if we recognize that, then that gives us a basis to address and work through and navigate the differences. If we don't have a sense that there are things that are beyond your preference and mine, our awareness and our concurrence that just are, then that kind of takes the platform out from under both of us, and now we're in free fall, and it can devolve into combat.
Can I throw out a model that might, again, try and synthesize these ideas in a way that gives a structure for us as voters moving forward, for candidates, for elected officials, and again, trying to have space for, but create bridges between fundamental disagreements, because there are many in this country. And maybe that model is, we as voters, candidates, elected officials, we need to be more direct and clear and specific about what we believe and where we disagree with others, but in a respectful way, and ask others to do the same. And the reason for that is, number one, we will better identify where we do genuinely disagree on substance and not just disagree on perception if we misunderstand the other side, but we'll have a more clear-eyed view of, here's where we actually differ and where we have to debate one another. But by doing that, that will also uncover more areas of genuine common ground, because if you're willing to have this actual conversation of, here's what I really believe, and Derek, you say, here's what I really believe, and then we put the 10 things on the list and say, okay, well, maybe on these 7 things, we really do just have a fundamental disagreement. But on these 3 things, we actually agree and have some common ground. And what I would hope that would elicit would be that the areas where there is some common ground, that's where shared action can take place. That's where you can have compromise bills and consensus approaches to various issues. But then we also don't want to ignore the 7 things where we do genuinely disagree. But then, I would frame it as, if everyone going into it, again, using the sports analogy, you go into it knowing the rules of the game and knowing that I'm going to try and win, and if I don't win, that's okay, because to your point, Derek, I can come back another day. But if there's sort of this awareness and acceptance of the fact that we're going to debate and discuss and disagree, where we align, let's work together to move the ball forward, so to speak. Where we don't align, let's just acknowledge that we are just going to have to go try and persuade others, whether that be voters or legislators, whether we're trying to win an election or pass a bill, and then just let it be okay that we disagreed on those things. And I hope that I'm successful more often. You hope that you're successful more often. Is that model a way to, again, make room for fundamental, clear disagreements and allow that to happen, but also identify common ground? Can that be a constructive path, whether it's policymaking, campaigning, or just the way that voters interact with one another?
Yes, definitely. And what you're saying actually highlights and points to why the modern, like today's version of campaign and political tactics is so damaging, because it prevents us from having those conversations with people to get to the point where we recognize that of those 10 things, where there's actually 3 we agree on, right? Everything in campaigns and how we interact, or not we, but I guess how a lot of folks in the sphere of policymaking interact with policymakers is designed to keep them away from each other, right? To never have those conversations that, at least publicly, to where they realize, hey, there's agreement here that we can build on and move something forward. Now, we're going to set aside these other 7 things that we would like to do, because there's no way we can move those forward. But we can find these 3 and go. Because what this means is, when you think about that in the big picture, it means that when you don't interact with people who think differently than you do, whether you are a sitting lawmaker, whether you're in a campaign, whether you're just a citizen that cares and wants to see solutions happen, you are denying yourself the chance to advance your principles and goals and values, because you never get to the realization that you have a shared belief with some people who would create a broad enough coalition to get something done. And instead, we simply argue over competing visions, which is what, for instance, campaigns are about. And then when someone gets in power, we think the other people completely disagree with us, or the other side acts like they completely disagree with us, because, again, they actually get punished if they actually start to have some of these conversations. Someone runs a primary against them because it seems like, oh, you're moving too close to the other side. You're buddy-buddy with someone from the other party. And so the things that they claim to cherish on both sides never move forward. And so it's like not only bad politics, it's bad policy, and it's like not even fulfilling the vision of what they say they care about. It's fulfilling something that raises people in politics, raises people a lot of money. It allows them to stay in power and to be the ones making decisions. Because if the people you're supposed to lead never go out and interact in ways that then find solutions, then you're completely in control. And it just perpetuates a cycle that's vicious and that destroys confidence in our government, frankly, because politics is exhausting and it makes people cynical. And when you see everything as politics all the time, and you're never, again, it's like you're going through all the struggle with never getting to the satisfaction. And nobody really wants that. It's like constant exercise, but you're never strengthening your muscles.
Significant element here, I think, is how we see ourselves and see others. Some have suggested that assertiveness is I matter, you matter. Aggressiveness is I matter, you don't. Passiveness is you matter, I don't. The most healthy framework is the assertive. We both matter. And that, I think, comes out of growing up experience, life experience. And sometimes we gain it more natively in a functional family. Sometimes we gain it through rough and tumble real life experience. But at some point, if we are seeing ourselves as the one that matters and the others that don't, we tend to objectify them and treat them as an object. And then we feign surprise that they react as though we're treating them as an object. I think people who are savvy and functional and effective in life generally, and particularly in political settings, are ones that understand that and approach it in that manner.
If I can mention one more thing on kind of the discourse and polarization theme, and then I do want to shift gears a little bit and ask about, kind of bright spots or unique takeaways for Utah, and maybe a little bit more on election trust and kind of what impact this election cycle will have on election policy moving forward at the state or federal level for that matter. But to kind of put a capstone on this portion of the discussion, and I think we talked about this in the last episode as well with Rick and Peter, but the vice presidential debate with J.D. Vance and Tim Walz was, from what I saw, watching the debate and then kind of watching the commentary afterwards, and especially just normal people commenting on it, was a great example of some of what we're talking about. That there was clear, genuine, robust, fundamental disagreement on a range of issues. But there was also a surprising level of, I actually agree with my opponent on this, or he's got a good point here, and we're aligned on this, and it was refreshing in that there was a modicum of respect towards one another. They disagreed vehemently on so many things, but they were polite, they were civil, they were respectful, and in the course of their disagreement, they identified where there was some common ground. And, when people ask, well, is there hope for more uniting common ground type discourse moving forward, or is that just gone forever in American politics? To me, that's a good example of, yes, it's possible because it happened in the vice presidential debate. That's a good example of that. So I just offer that as kind of a concluding thought. If you have any reaction to that, is that, again, does that give us a glimmer of hope? Are we hopeful that it can be like that in the future?
I think so. And I think part of the response of people watching, I'll speak for myself, is, wow, they can actually have a conversation. They've sheathed their swords. They're actually talking about things, and yeah, they disagree, but they're acknowledging the validity and dignity of the other person. And I think it's a reminder, oh yeah, we've kind of all been on autopilot because we just perceive both sides as being combatants, and we're just trying to stay out of the shrapnel range. Oh, they're talking about, yeah, that's. I think that's what I'd like to see. I think that's the type of conversation I'd like to have.
So let's talk for a minute about, we've talked a lot over the past months of this election cycle about the idea of election trust and kind of voting policy. And Derek, I'd love to get your thoughts on, if you look back to, in May of this year, Sutherland Institute held an event, the Election Trust Forum, that kind of kicked off or accelerated sort of this ongoing discussion about trust in our elections, because that's been a big theme in recent years. Looking from sort of that event to now the culmination of this election cycle, is there anything that stands out to you that gives an indication one way or the other? Are we making progress as a state and as a nation with sort of restoring or bolstering trust in elections? Are there areas of concern? And how should we take all that and then influence what we do moving forward, again, as a state, as a nation?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, as any election probably is going to be, but in the specific context of 2024, the positive side, you had an election that, despite all indications to the contrary at the presidential level, the indications being that one side in particular, the Trump campaign, was gearing up for to deny the results if he lost and to kind of do a 2020 rehash. It didn't go that way, and of course, some people say, well, that's just because he won, and I think there's legitimacy to that point. But it's also in part because of how they campaigned. In 2020, or in the years since 2020, I should say, there has been a heavy focus on the results of 2020 were inaccurate. And in 2020, there was a heavy focus on don't vote certain ways because they're prone to fraud. So it was a focus on things that inherently, the messages themselves undermine trust in voting. And in 2024, much like his campaign in 2016, is a note that Chuck Todd on NBC on election night coverage made this point, that was not the case. They focused on the substance of their campaign, the policy-wise, their vision, and whether or not you agree with that, I think you can acknowledge that's what their focus was, the campaign. And so now, You could say, but he still would have denied the election if he had lost. And possibly, that's true. But this is a big reason why he won, was he didn't go in those directions that would have inflamed those things if he had lost. And so I think it speaks to the importance of elevating substance and principles and vision in campaigns, and why that's not just good for a campaign, it's good campaign politics, but it's also good for our society. It's good for the health of our Constitution and our republic, because it avoids things that undermine trust in elections, and it avoids outcomes where under the attacks on the election itself and the results itself become the theme. That was kind of on the positive side. On the maybe more negative side, here in Utah, we had pretty good experience over the vast majority of the state. In terms of voters' election experience, which is important for election trust, because one of the main themes coming out of study of what influences people's trust and confidence in voting, one of the main things is what's their experience. Did they wait long time in line? Was it just a big headache trying to vote and those kinds of things? In one county, it was more along those lines of a headache to vote and long lines in Utah County, which is where I live. Maybe as a continuing anecdote to kind of support this, right? This was brought up on election night in the day after election coverage, but it continues to today. Right, we're recording this 3 days after the election. I got a text just today through the ballot tracking system that the state maintains, saying my ballot has just been received and processed, not counted, but received, and so they noted we got it, and we've got it ready to count, and that's great, and also very depressing, getting this 3 days after the election. And I submitted my ballot on election day through a Dropbox, right? It wasn't something where it arrived after election day through the mail or anything like that. And it took them 3 days to get to it. And it speaks to kind of, I guess, the competence of administration of this election. And that kind of thing can undermine trust in elections. And it's interesting because the county clerk down there has a lot of concerns about how people vote, kind of like how Trump did in 2020. And I can just, again, from the research and the evidence and the facts of the matter, the administration of the election in Utah County is going to do a lot more to undermine belief in the security and integrity of our elections than any ideological debate or policy reform that could be passed, which is an ironic thing, right? That folks sometimes who say election integrity is one of their top priorities don't understand what's going to actually improve the integrity of our elections, and when they're put in places of power, then they actually actively undermine the integrity of our elections because of a lack of just competence in the administration, which is seems to be the theme of what happened in Utah County.
I think there's another element that has a bearing on perception of the effectiveness of the election process, and it's unfortunate because precinct caucuses are run by private entities that are political parties. The elections are conducted by elected and employed people who are administering those generally very well. The experience this spring that many had at the precinct caucus, which, worth mentioning historically, were conducted in homes, in neighborhoods. And for various reasons, they have been consolidated now. And in our situation, in the south part of the Salt Lake Valley, we met at a high school. Multiple hundreds of people arrived and encountered a semi-chaotic, and for some it was just flat out chaotic, sufficiently so that they didn't even go. They got past the door, saw the melee, and left. And those who remained had to wade through a very difficult, uncomfortable process, time-consuming process that gave them, I think, for some who had done that before, probably thought, well, yeah, that's kind of the way it is. It is irksome, but hey, that's the way it is. Others who were there for the first time probably thought, my gosh, this is nuts. If this is how elections are done in the state of Utah, I really have to wonder. And again, I'll reinforce the unfortunate thing is the processes at the precinct caucus event are distinct from how elections are conducted in the state of Utah. But I think that had some potential bearing on how the whole process is regarded.
To kind of tie a ribbon around all this, we're about at time, but I want to give each of you a chance to kind of give any final brief thoughts. But again, going to one of the big themes you've been articulating, Derek, is for candidates or elected officials, kind of the framework seems to be focus on substance, focus on competence, and focus on sound principles, which means anchored to the Constitution. And substantive issues like kitchen table issues, and competence, whether that's competent administration of elections or demonstrating that you would be a competent governor, lowercase g, whatever elected office you're seeking, that you would bring a substantive competence to the execution of that office, rather than, again, focusing on maybe some of these ideological or highly politicized things, and then kind of, again, anchoring to those principles that it's a winning campaign strategy, it's a winning governance strategy, and ultimately it's healthier for the nation. So maybe that's kind of the framework for everyone moving forward. With all that being said, I mean, in the minute or two that we have left, any final thoughts or takeaways that either of you want to share? And think of it in terms of we're speaking to voters who have just seen this election come to a conclusion. On everyone's minds, the question is what's next for governance, for politics, for campaigns and elections in the future. What is my life going to look like in the coming weeks, months, and years with respect to what was just decided on Election Day? Stan, maybe start with you and then Derek give you the final word. Any final thoughts on what we should learn or from this or expect for the future?
Well, I've had some thoughts about federalism and the importance of federalism, and I think it's worth talking about what that means. And I've recently written, and I'll reference here some of that. Because we regularly refer to the national or nationwide government as the federal government, many probably have the impression that federalism is about national government matters and processes. A more accurate or correct understanding of federalism, and this is from the dictionary, would be federalism is the distribution of power in an organization, such as government, and between the central authority and the constituent units, translating between the national government and the states. In this distribution of power and responsibility, we see a natural dynamic tension, a necessary and potentially constructive debate about the respective roles of the states and the central or national government that the states created when the Constitution was composed in 1787. The core doctrine, if you will, of the structure and process of functional federalism in the United States is clearly articulated in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, and I'll read that. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. I believe this is an important element to have in mind as we think about what we can anticipate in policy discussions and policy-making decisions here in our state with the significant number of Republican and presumptively conservative people in elective offices, and at the national level with the advent of a Republican executive administration and a Republican U.S. Senate and a potentially Republican House of Representatives. And I think it's also worth noting that, generally speaking, we hear Republicans referring to the 10th Amendment, state powers and associated sovereignty. But states with more predominantly Democratic leadership and influence also have good reason to be attentive to functional federalism. Though partisan political winds can and do shift in D.C., the seat of our national government, each of the 50 states has the power to make decisions that are responsive to and effective for the people in the individual state. So preserving the sovereignty of each of the so-called 50 laboratories of democracy, as the states have been referred to, is vital, whether predominantly Democratic or Republican. So I think the element and significance of federalism is and will be important moving forward.
Thanks, Dan. Derek, in the brief time we have left, final thoughts you want voters to take away from this?
Doing things that build, or at least don't undermine, public confidence in voting produces both good politics and good policy. I think this is an important reason why Trump won the presidency. It's an important theme of what we're seeing in Utah County about why the election has not really gone well down there, kind of what the priorities are. And that then is, guys, a segue into an additional theme that when we do things that promote the health of our republic, promote the institutions of our government, like voting, like elections, like fidelity to the Constitution in those who are in power, those things are, again, the things that produce things that are going to help people win elections, put good policy in place, and do so in a way that doesn't destroy the very means of getting into power and being able to promote good policy. So a lot of this, I think, is the theme is take a long-term perspective. Whether you are running for office, whether you're a campaign supporter or an advisor, whether you're just a voter trying to think through how to interpret and who to vote for and look through all these things, focus on definitely promoting our institutions of voting and government and sound policy through constitutional principles and values, and then be supporting people who are doing the same. And if we do those things, I think we're going to get more of the outcomes that we all want, whichever party you're a part of, whichever system of beliefs that you claim politically. It's going to push towards your outcomes if we can do these things, and we'll find actually that we are kind of playing the same game. Again, going back to the football analogy, we're all trying to promote the Constitution in our own way, and even when we disagree with it, we can recognize that that's the case and kind of overcome some of the rifts that polarization has created and that extreme partisan focus on partisan advantage has created, and build the kind of country and the communities and the society that we want for ourselves, but more importantly, or as importantly, for future generations, and we want them to grow up in.
Well, we will call it there. We're at time, but thank you both, Derek Monson and Stan Rasmussen, having this post-election conversation with us and being on Defending Ideas. Once again, we appreciate it.
Glad to be here, Nick.
Thank you.
We're going to take one quick break before we leave you with some talking points. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. There's really one key takeaway on my mind from this discussion, whether you're a voter, policymaker, or even a future candidate for office. The way we engage in policy and political debate should be anchored to these principles that our guests articulated: substance, competence, and good principles. Policy and political debates should focus on substantive kitchen table issues, and voters should seek for and candidates should aspire to competent governance across the board. And we all should remain anchored to sound principles, in particular, the constitutional structure of our nation. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. And don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. And also, please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker, anyone who you think might find it interesting. Lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas. From the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City, I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.